I'm pleased to share some of our experiences with Living Lakes Canada and how we've been able to apply citizen science in some of our projects locally here or in this part of Canada. I'll give you a bit of background about who we are and what we are. We're a joint initiative of WildSite, which is an environmental NGO based in southeastern BC. We are also managed by the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, of course out of Winnipeg, and Global Nature Fund, which is based in Germany. We're a network of community-based organizations working to protect Canada's freshwater resources, mainly by bridging that gap between science and action to foster citizen-based water stewardship. We're also affiliated with Living Lakes International. This is a network of grassroots organizations who work to protect more than 100 globally significant lakes and wetlands and rivers all across the world. That's a project of Global Nature Fund, and it was selected as an official project of the United Nations Decade of Education and Sustainable Development for its efforts mostly to exchange ideas, provide advice among members, and support joint water stewardship projects in some of the most globally significant areas around the world. We also work to come together to solve really complex environmental problems like climate change impacts on water bodies, eutrophication, of course that's a big one, and toxic algae blooms associated with that. So just a bit about what we are. But back here to Canada, in an effort to better support water stewardship in Canada and share our experiences in BC and Alberta, and also bring in those international lessons from our partners around the world, we've grown to include stewardship groups in Canada that are working on water-related issues. Those partners now include the Keepers of the Athabasca, the Alberta Lake Management Society, who you'll hear from afterward, the Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition in northwestern BC, the BC Lake Stewardship Society, WildSite, the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations, Nature Canada, the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, and the Lake Huron Centre for Coastal Conservation. So those are just a few of the groups that we work with. And well, what do we do? Well, we definitely recognize that there is a vital role the government plays in managing planning, management, and regulation of lakes and their watersheds. But there's also that essential component of taking that science to the public as a bridge to stewardship actions through awareness and education, citizen science and engagement, and innovative policy. Again, those pie pieces. And we really aim to shrink the gap between the discovery and the theory that was brought up earlier. Through our leadership and support, we've developed a number of community water stewardship groups around this part of Canada. Friends of Kootenay Lake is one of them that's been a huge success in southeastern BC. The Lake Windermere Ambassadors, the Elk River Alliance, Save Lake Winnipeg Coalition, Columbia Lake Stewardship Group, and most recently Friends of Lac La Biche up in northern Alberta as well. And through our efforts, we've been recognized by the federal government as best practices for community-based monitoring. This was really a result of a project that was done in 2010 by a grad student from the University of Waterloo. He wanted to identify successes and challenges of community-based monitoring, and he looked at 400 projects across Canada, and one of them was ours. Through his research, we really began to learn what is citizen science. We didn't even know it was something, and we didn't know that there was a lot of literature that already existed about it, and we didn't know why we were doing things right. We just knew that it worked in our community, so it was hugely helpful to us to actually identify what those factors were so that we could take those lessons and share them with our members. Following his research, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency commissioned a further study that really looked at these successes. Their intent was to identify these successes so that they could use them in environmental impact assessment follow-up. That hasn't gone anywhere since then, unfortunately. But to pull out those successes, of course, obtaining adequate funding, very important to ensure that the project can be delivered, whether that's the ability to leverage funds or create strong relationships with funders over multiple years. We learned that adopting a monitoring protocol leads to higher quality data and allows for comparisons between monitoring initiatives, also allows developing trends over time. The creation of partnerships within the community helps to build legitimacy, support, and trust. And working in partnership also helps to maximize limited resources that are available for community-based monitoring. And it also builds a strong foundation of volunteers for other project support. Linking monitoring with decision-making, we learned creates clear objectives and purposes for data and avoids a term that I love called data kleptomania, which is really the collection of data for no real purpose. And lastly, communicating these results clearly and concisely so that the public learns about the achievements of the program and builds interests and validates the work of the organization. So I'll take a brief look at 3 case studies. I won't go too much into the specifics of the science, but happy to talk about it afterward. The first case study I want to look at is Lake Windermere, which is located in southeastern BC, 3-hour drive west of here. It's a very important lake for the community of Invermere. It's a source of drinking water. It provides habitat for fish and wildlife. But there's intense recreational and shoreline development happening in that part of the Columbia Basin. This lake actually sits at the headwaters of the Columbia River. Because of these concerns, our community in Invermere really wanted to become a part of understanding what these impacts were and how they could help to create a better lake for future generations. So in 2005, we launched a citizen-based stewardship initiative with the aim to protect and restore the lake's natural values. The approach that we took for the 5-year project was a combination of partnerships, science, and stewardship, and I'll go a little bit over some of those factors of success and what made this project successful. First of all, collaboration was key to every aspect of our project. We engaged all levels of government, First Nations, community organizations, and businesses in data collection, education, and on-the-ground activities. For 5 years, we did in-depth water quality monitoring. We conducted biological inventories and aquatic surveys. And we used trusted provincial and federal monitoring protocols. We used the BC ambient freshwater sampling for our lake sampling protocol, which we were trained by the provincial government. We used sensitive habitat inventory mapping, which is a protocol developed by Fisheries and Oceans Canada in partnership with others. This protocol identifies high-value fish and wildlife habitat and then has an outcome that directs shoreline development in order to protect that habitat. And again, I'm happy to talk more about that afterwards if folks have questions. Lastly, the protocol we used was CABIN, which is a Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network. It's a stream monitoring protocol developed by Environment Canada. And it's used by multiple federal agencies, so it's really one of the most trusted stream monitoring protocols across Canada. It's used by Parks Canada, it's used by the province of BC, it's used by the province of New Brunswick, and territory of the Yukon. It's also used by industry and community groups. The great thing about CABIN is that once you're trained and certified using this protocol, all data is equal. So whether you're in industry, whether you're in government, whether you belong to a community group, your data is inputted into the database and it's considered equal. So Living Lakes Canada is actually a trainer of CABIN, and we deliver CABIN workshops and certify community groups in Canada so that they're able to access those skills. Because of the trust that we established with local, provincial, and federal governments right from the beginning, even before we started collecting information, our results we knew that they would be applied through that trust. The data that we collected was used for a number of purposes: to update provincial water quality objectives for the lake, so that was an initiative of the province. We used the data to develop shoreline management guidelines. That was a partnership with Fisheries and Oceans. And all of this information was used to inform a comprehensive lake management plan that has now been adopted into policy. And next up, our CABIN data is going to be used to inform flood mitigation in the lake's main tributary. We've been doing CABIN on this tributary for 5 years, and midway through that initiative, we saw a large erosion event happen in the creek, which resulted in a lot of flooding for the surrounding communities. So we're actually using our turbidity information and our benthic information to understand how that creek might be coming back after that erosion event. And also, some of the temperature information is being used by Greg Utzig, who's doing some climate studies for the Columbia River Treaty. So that question just came up earlier, but some of this information is being used. Lastly, we engaged our community. We trained hundreds of volunteers to do water monitoring. They came out with us so that we had an oversight into how the data was being collected, but we always had that support. We hosted events, public events to celebrate water, to get people involved, and we educated children and adults on what a healthy watershed means. Because of our approaches, our project was recognized as a land award winner by the Real Estate Foundation of BC. They were a project funder from the beginning, and because of that relationship, we were able to leverage other funding from other sources for future projects, which I'll talk about as well. And although the project is complete now, the work continues. We handed it over to a group of community volunteers that continue with the monitoring. We do continue to provide support, but the Lake Windermere ambassadors are now really a board. They've just become their own they've just achieved charitable status, and they're taking that information and ensuring that the lake management plan is implemented and followed. And they're actually receive referrals from government for development proposals. So the next case study I'll just touch on briefly as well is north of here in the upper Athabasca watershed. So in response to concerns about development of the oil sands region, the federal government announced a comprehensive water monitoring strategy for the Athabasca River in 2011. They're using the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network methodology, the one I mentioned earlier. But there are concerns in that part of in the upper portions of the watershed because it's largely secluded from the intensive cabin program that the federal government is doing. So our partners, the keepers of the Athabasca, are concerned. They want to know what's happening in the upper portion upstream of the oil sands, and they're interested to learn what types of pollution, if any, might be resulting from land use activities there. They're not alone. So many stewardship groups face challenges developing and implementing monitoring plans that are appropriate for addressing concerns in their watersheds. And as we continue to see increasing industrialization, urbanization, and climate change pressures on our landscape and infrastructure, impact events like spills, sedimentation, like I mentioned earlier, or wastewater overflow could be occurring more frequently. And more often, governments are not holding industry accountable for addressing impacts from these events. We are seeing a real need for communities to access independent, timely, and reliable third-party monitoring, and that's why there's so much interest. One event in particular was last year in October, when 670 million liters of coal mine waste were spilled into two tributaries of the upper Athabasca River near Hinton. The downstream communities and our partners, the keepers of the Athabasca, were concerned about potential heavy metal contamination in the river. And because for the past 2 years we'd been working with them and we trained them in the cabin protocol and certified them, they were able to gain the skills and confidence to go out and perform water quality monitoring and sediment collection in response to that spill. They did that also in partnership with the University of Alberta. So we're working together now to analyze the data, the next big heavy step, and share those monitoring results. We want to compare those monitoring results to provincial and federal standards and the mining company's own monitoring response plan. So it's our hope that this short and future long-term monitoring in the upper portions of the watershed could possibly help to inform the forthcoming Upper Athabasca Land Use Plan, as well as fill gaps in WWF Canada's Freshwater Health Assessment, which, if you haven't heard of that, it's an incredible communication tool that uses cabin to assess their benthic data. So they have a number of indicators that they look at in assessing river health, and cabin's one of the protocols that they're using. So our data is helping to fill some of those gaps. Lastly, we'll head southwest to a project that we just launched in BC's Flathead Valley. It's one of the most important biologically rich places in Canada. It's home to critical landscape. It provides core habitat and connectivity across the province of BC, Alberta, and Montana. We are working with it's an international campaign coordinated by our partners WildSite, based in southeastern BC, along with other NGOs in Canada and the US. The campaign focuses on the heart of the Yellowstone to Yukon region and the crown of the continent ecosystem. South of the border, the Flathead River is federally designated wild and scenic river. It forms the boundary of Glacier National Park. It supports native bull trout and pure string West Slope cutthroat trout. both species that are listed. The tributary streams identified by our program provide critical spawning and rearing habitat for these fish. Despite a ban on mining and energy development announced by the BC government in February 2010, the Flathead is still urgently in need of permanent protection. Our Flathead River Biomonitoring Program uses Watershed Health as a framework for advocating for landscape conservation. It's our aim that the results of the monitoring program will support the Flathead Wild campaign goals of expanding the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park and establishing a Southern Rocky Mountain Wildlife Management Area for the Flathead Valley. So our goal is to use an evidence-based approach, and that over time, our monitoring will provide tools and fill a knowledge gap with respect to forestry impacts on freshwater and fisheries. It'll give our communities the information that they need to advocate for protection of this ecosystem. We're currently in year 2 of our monitoring program, and our partners, which include industry and government, are excited for the results. Additional long-term impact, I was thrown off by the 2-minute there. Okay, that's okay. Additional long-term outcomes beyond our initial goals of informing landscape conservation, will be to provide supplemental data to the bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout spawning studies that are being done by the University of Montana and the Flathead Lake Biological Research Station. We're also hoping that we can help to develop a transboundary Flathead Basin cabin model. So that's the models that are developed by Environment Canada, and they're very interested in that. And if we can work across the border, we're really excited. And also to better identify site-specific impairments on a watershed scale. So we have some tributaries that have seen logging, we have some tributaries that have not seen logging, so we're really excited to compare those results. And also a forthcoming WWF Canada Freshwater Health Assessment Report Card for the Columbia Basin. So we'll help to fill some of the gaps for that. So overall, citizen science continues to gain legitimacy, and numerous benefits are being realized. What we're really seeing on the ground is that citizen science builds community trust. It helps communities establish a desired vision for themselves. It develops and extends social networks amongst communities, and supplements traditional methods of data collection. And then lastly, it enables the scientific questions of citizens to be answered. Now more than ever, we're seeing a rise in the application of citizen science, and it's already been pointed out today that we're seeing a loss of government-funded scientific research, and we are seeing more of a need to fill those gaps. At the same time, citizens and communities are becoming engaged, organizing themselves and becoming active. They want to be involved in positive actions that lead to solutions to our complex environmental problems. And then I'll just, of course, thank our funders for supporting us.